name is Ray Haas, and I'll be talking about football versus rugby, and which one is safer to play. So, I don't know, you guys are not from around here, so are you guys aware with rugby? And no? Alright, well, this is rugby, and this is football, and basically what I'm trying to get at with this picture is the guys who are playing football are wearing pads, and the guys who are playing rugby are not wearing pads, as you can see. And so, to determine which sport is safer to play, we can look at a medical condition called CTE, and that stands for chronic traumatic encephalopathy. It's hard to pronounce. But basically, CTE is developed when, it can be developed when you get like a one-time massive concussion or through repeated hits to the head. And the only way to diagnose CTE is actually to diagnose a brain that is dead. I mean, the person has to be dead. You can't diagnose them when they're still alive. And so I was looking up research on CTE in football, and the Journal of the American Medical Association did a study, and they dissected 111 brains of NFL players, or former NFL players who were deceased, and they found out that 110 of those brains had CTE. And then I looked at CTE in rugby, and I found that there's only been one case of CTE in rugby players, which was very interesting to me. Yeah. And so, key points from this, the football CTE article was published 9 months before the rugby article. So that means they had dissected 111 brains before the rugby article was even out. And so that leads me to think that they started doing more research into the CTE behind rugby because of the research done in football CTE. And it's pretty, it's pretty interesting that there's only one diagnosis of CTE in a rugby player. And then also in the study for the CTE for the rugby players, it mentioned that they only really they only studied most rugby players who were still alive, and you need to be dead for them to 100% know that you had CTE. So it doesn't really add up. So basically the takeaways, many more of the football brains have been diagnosed with CTE, obviously. It just makes me think that the only reason that they're really looking into CTE within rugby football players is because of the research that has been done with football and all of the attention that's been put behind it in the past years. And so to conclude, I would definitely say that football is a much more dangerous sport to play than rugby, just based on how many brains that they've dissected in it was 99% of all NFL players were diagnosed with CTE, so, compared to just one rugby player. So it makes it's pretty compelling evidence. And I believe that the reason that football players are diagnosed with CTE way more than rugby players is actually because of the pads and because of the helmets that football players wear. Because basically these helmets they protect your head so well that people will use them as weapons, basically. And you can see right here with these guys that that's really bad tackling for them, I guess. It's not that people don't teach you to tackle that way, but that's just kind of how it happens. And collisions like this, helmet to helmet, will happen every single game. And a collision like that will definitely do damage to the brain. But then when you notice the rugby players, first thing that I noticed in this picture is how this guy, his head is up and he's looking right at the guy, and at the point of contact they're gonna hit shoulders instead of heads. And then if you also notice this guy, his head is all back, he's trying to protect it as much as possible, and I believe that this is just because they're not wearing helmets and because they're less protected, which actually makes them more protected in a way. And so it's just interesting to me how all these pads and these fancy helmets will actually, it seems to do more damage. But so basically, I believe that we should try and teach kids how to play safer, tackle more like this guy rather than these guys, and I think it'll make the sport a lot safer to play. So that's all I have to say. That's it.